Imagine this, uh, it's Christmas time, right? It's
Hmm.
2011. Everyone's getting ready to celebrate with their families. It's supposed to be, happy and joyful.
Yeah.
And then this guy, Russ Faria, he finds his wife, Betsy,
Right.
brutally murdered
Oh, gosh.
in their home.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he's got what seems like, an airtight alibi,
Yeah.
but he still ends up the prime suspect.
Wow.
It's crazy. So we're diving into this Dateline podcast, the thing about Pam,
Okay.
to like break down this whole crazy case
Yeah.
to try to figure out how things went so wrong.
Yeah, I think what really gets me about this case is like, at first glance, it seems pretty straightforward, right? You've got the husband, he finds his wife dead.
Right.
He's obviously distraught, calls 911.
Yeah.
But the deeper you dig into the details, you start to see all these layers of complexity.
Yeah.
It's definitely not as simple as it first appears.
No, not at all. So let's start with the basics.
Yeah.
Betsy Faria, she's found dead in her home right after Christmas
Hmm.
in 2011. And the cause of death is multiple stab wounds. I mean, that right there puts the focus on her husband, Russ.
It does. But like we were saying, things aren't always what they seem.
Definitely not. And I think one of the first things that makes this case so complicated is the conflicting information about their relationship.
Oh, yeah.
You have some friends and family who are saying that Russ and Betsy were a happy couple,
Yeah.
and then others are describing Russ as like controlling and volatile.
Exactly. And those conflicting accounts, they actually became a big part of the prosecution's case.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they really focused on making Russ look bad.
Right.
They wanted to paint him as someone with a shady past.
Yeah, like they didn't want the jury to trust him at all.
Exactly. They really leaned into that.
So besides focusing on the conflicting stories about Russ and Betsy's relationship,
Uh-huh.
what else did the prosecution use against him?
Well, they relied a lot on what seemed like circumstantial evidence and what they presented as suspicious behavior from Russ.
Okay.
Like what? Well, for example, they pointed to his 911 call. He was clearly upset.
Right.
But they tried to use that against him, saying he was too emotional, that it seemed staged.
It's like they were saying that no matter how Russ reacted, it would be suspicious.
Yeah,
Like if he was calm and collected, that would be suspicious.
right.
And if he was emotional, that would be suspicious too.
Exactly. They were trying to create this narrative where he couldn't win no matter what.
It's like they totally ignored the fact that people grieve in different ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong way to react to such a traumatic event.
So it seems like the prosecution was trying to manipulate the jury's perception of Russ,
Right.
but they also presented physical evidence from the crime scene, right?
They did. They pointed to the blood found on Russ's slippers and a light switch, and they also brought up the semen found in Betsy, which suggested they had been intimate before her death.
Okay, so that's where the whole forensic evidence thing comes in.
Yeah, it does. It's super important to look at forensic evidence in context.
What do you mean?
Well, just because blood or semen is found at a crime scene doesn't automatically mean anything. You have to look at the bigger picture. For example, was the blood splatter consistent with the way Betsy was attacked?
Yeah.
Or could that blood have gotten there some other way?
That's a good point. And then there's the issue of Russ's alibi.
Yeah.
The prosecution actually tried to use that against him too.
Oh, wow.
He had surveillance footage and receipts that proved he was at different places when the murder happened.
Right.
But the prosecution said that was all part of his plan, that his alibi was too perfect to be real.
So basically they were saying he was framing himself.
Right, like he was trying to make it look like he couldn't have possibly committed the murder.
It's a bold strategy.
But wouldn't that take a lot of planning and coordination?
It would. You'd have to be incredibly organized and meticulous.
Exactly. And that's where the whole idea of reasonable doubt comes in.
Right.
The prosecution was asking the jury to believe that Russ had come up with this super complicated scheme. Like, he faked evidence and perfectly timed his movements just to make it seem like he was innocent.
It's a lot to ask a jury to believe without solid proof.
But Russ's lawyer, Joel Schwartz, he presented a pretty strong counterargument, didn't he?
He did. He addressed each point the prosecution made and offered alternative explanations.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one thing, he pointed out that Russ didn't have any blood on him.
Right. You'd think if he had stabbed Betsy multiple times,
Yeah,
there would be some blood on his clothes or his skin.
exactly. And Schwartz suggested that the blood on the slippers could have been planted there.
Okay.
He also really emphasized the strength of Russ's alibi, which was backed up by multiple witnesses and his cell phone data.
And didn't the defense also bring up the rigor mortis?
They did?
That's the stiffening of the body after death, right?
Yeah, and it showed that Betsy had been dead for hours before Russ even got home.
Which again supports his alibi.
Right. The rigor mortis evidence totally contradicted the prosecution's timeline of events.
So it seems like the defense was building a strong case in Russ's favor.
It does.
But I know there are more twists and turns to come in this story.
Oh, yeah, this is just the beginning. It really seemed like Russ's lawyer was doing a good job poking holes in the prosecution's case.
Yeah, I thought so too. But then the closing argument happened. And honestly, that's what really threw me.
Yeah, Prosecutor Leah Eske's closing argument, it was something else.
It was like she was telling a story from a movie or something. It felt so over the top.
You're not wrong. It was definitely dramatic. Eskotsky basically laid out this theory that Russ had been planning this murder for years.
Seriously.
For years. That's what she said. She called it his, ultimate role play.
What does that even mean?
I'm not totally sure. But she claimed that he got his friends involved in this elaborate scheme to make him look innocent.
Oh my gosh. So she's saying he basically staged the whole thing.
Right. She even suggested that he had sex with Betsy right before killing her.
Oh, wow.
That he took a shower, placed the bloody slippers just so, and then called 911.
That's like she was trying to write a crime novel or something.
It was a pretty wild story. But the thing is, there wasn't much evidence to back it up.
So why do you think she went that route?
I think she was trying to appeal to the jury's emotions.
Yeah.
By painting this vivid and shocking picture of Russ as this mastermind killer, she might have created a bias against him.
Right. Even if the evidence wasn't super strong, her story might have stuck with the jurors.
Exactly, and that's the danger of closing arguments.
How so?
Well, technically they're not considered evidence.
Right.
But they can have a huge impact on how the jury sees the case.
Yeah, because it's the last thing they hear before they go off to deliberate.
Right, and a good prosecutor can use that opportunity to tell a story that really resonates with the jury.
Even if that story isn't completely accurate.
Exactly, and that's what makes this case even more troubling because the Judge Menemeyer, he actually blocked the defense from presenting some really important information about this woman, Pam Hupp.
Pam Hupp. This is where things get really interesting.
Oh, yeah. Pam Hupp, she was a close friend of Betsy's, and as it turns out, she was involved in some pretty shady stuff.
Okay, like what?
So just a few days before Betsy's death, the beneficiary on her life insurance policy was changed.
Changed from who to who?
From Russ to Pam.
Wow. And how much was the policy worth?
$150,000.
Okay. That's a significant amount of money.
It is. And get this, it wasn't even changed through the normal channels.
What do you read?
It was done at a local library.
A library? Why a library?
It seems like whoever changed it was trying to avoid leaving a paper trail.
That's super suspicious.
Mm.
If Betsy really wanted Pam to have the money, why not do it the right way?
Right. It definitely raises some red flags.
And what was Pam's explanation for all of this?
She said that Betsy wanted her to have the money to help take care of her daughters.
Okay, so she's trying to make herself sound like the good guy?
Exactly, but then something else happened that makes her story even harder to believe.
What happened?
After Russ was convicted and sent to prison, Pam set up a trust fund for Betsy's daughters.
Okay, so it seems like she's following through on her promise.
Right. But then, just a short time later, she drained the entire trust fund.
Seriously, she took all the money.
Every last cent, Betsy's daughters were left with nothing.
So she gets this big payout from the insurance policy.
Yeah.
Then she creates this trust fund to look all generous and caring.
Mm-hmm.
And then she takes all the money for herself.
Yep.
That's incredibly shady.
It's beyond shady. And the fact that Judge Menemeyer wouldn't let the defense tell the jury about any of this is mind-boggling.
Seriously.
Yeah.
That seems like crucial information that could have really affected the outcome of the trial.
Exactly. If the jury had known about Pam Hupp and what she did with the insurance money,
Right.
who knows what they would have decided.
This whole thing just makes you wonder if justice was really served in this case.
It really does.
I mean, it's just crazy to think that the jury was kept in the dark about all this stuff about Pam Hupp, especially when they're the ones deciding whether a man should spend the rest of his life in prison.
It's definitely one of the most troubling parts of this whole case, and to make matters worse, Russ was actually found guilty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the jury convicted him of first-degree murder.
So he was sentenced to life in prison.
He was, but the story doesn't end there.
What do you mean?
Well, a lawyer who was working on a civil case for Betsy's daughters against Pam Hupp uncovered some new information.
Is this about the insurance money in the trust fund?
Yeah, it is. Get this, just 5 days before Russ's trial even started, Pam deposited a bunch of money into that trust fund she had set up for the daughters.
Wait a minute. If she was innocent and really just wanted to help Betsy's kids, why would she do that right before the trial?
It's definitely suspicious. It kind of seems like she was trying to make herself look less guilty, right when the spotlight was on her.
That's what I was thinking too. Like she knew people were starting to question her involvement.
Right. And then here's the real kicker. Just 20 days after Russ is convicted, Pam empties the trust fund.
Are you serious? So those poor girls got nothing.
It's heartbreaking. She basically played them. She made it seem like she was going to take care of them.
Uh-huh.
And then she just took all the money and ran.
While Russ is sitting in prison for a crime he might not have even committed.
Exactly. It's just a horrible situation all around. The more we learn about Pam Hupp, the more suspicious she becomes.
It really does seem like there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye. This whole case, it's just a reminder that things aren't always as simple as they seem.
Absolutely. You can't just take everything at face value. You have to look deeper, question what you hear, consider different perspectives.
And I think for our listeners, a lot of whom are probably around the same age that Russ was when this all went down,
Yeah,
this case is a really powerful lesson about being careful and aware,
absolutely. You have to be your own advocate. Don't just blindly trust what people tell you.
especially when it comes to something as serious as a murder trial.
Exactly. And even though our legal system is supposed to be fair and just,
Right.
it's not perfect. People make mistakes. There's bias, sometimes even corruption.
Yeah. That's a scary thought.
It is, but it's important to be aware of it. The Russ Faria case is a perfect example of how things can go wrong.
So what do you think happens now? I mean, where do we go from here?
Well, I think it's crucial that we keep digging into this case, keep asking questions about Pam Hupp and her potential involvement.
She's definitely a key piece of this puzzle. Her stories don't add up. Her actions are suspicious.
And the fact that she's managed to avoid any real scrutiny for so long is pretty disturbing.
Yeah, it feels like we've only scratched the surface of a much bigger story.
Exactly. And even though we may never know for sure what happened to Betsy Faria, we can't give up on the search for truth.
We owe it to Betsy and to Russ to keep pushing for answers.
And hopefully by shining a light on cases like this, we can help prevent similar injustices from happening in the future.
That's a great point. This deep dive has been really eye-opening.
It has.
I think it's important for everyone to do their own research, look at the evidence and come to their own conclusions.
I agree. We have to be critical thinkers, question what we see and hear, and never stop searching for the truth.
Well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating and unsettling journey.
It has, and thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure discussing this case with you.